All right. Take it away.
Alright, so we shall require a substantially new way of thinking if mankind is to survive, by Albert Einstein. And I picked this quote up from Lynn. You probably all remember her, the permaculture lady. She gave us a ton of information on permaculture, the ethics, and things like that. Which, speaking of which, permaculture. You have your 3 design ethics in the middle, which is care for earth, care for people, and fair share. Which are care for earth, care for people, and your fair share. And then you have your design principles around the side. And those consist of, hold up, I need to go in. Whoa.
Observe and interact.
Observe and interact, and things like that. Sorry, I can't read it. It was a lot clearer in my presentation. Which one is up here? Well, actually, give me a second, folks. Sorry about this. You have observe and interact, catch and store energy, obtain a yield, apply self-regulation, accept. Hold on. Now this is getting to me. Use and value renewable resources and services. Sorry. So, yeah. So those are some of your what you build to your permaculture design around it. This is another one I got from her. Permaculture is the transition from ignorant consumerism to responsible production. And so that's what we've been talking about all year, how what a lot of us believe, the industrial food system is so messed up, really. You try and build, it has no way to sustain itself. It completes. It destroys the soil, it destroys the earth, it puts out tons of pollution, it burns up your resources. There's no really, it's not a good system. Of course it's going to collapse, crash and burn, whatever you want to say. But permaculture, as we've learned, is really that transition. It's a way to build to sustain humans, but also to keep your resources. As it says, find ways to use renewable things. Don't just throw out things. Don't ship your food halfway across the world to get it to some little small market in the middle of the Rocky Mountains. No. It's build a place around you where you can get the food you need. When we went up to Crimpy, he's growing bananas up in, 8,000 feet above sea level in the middle of February in a greenhouse? Come on. Now that's impressive. So that's really permaculture. You learn how to build and design around you, and it's that transition from a food system that works, yes, and it feeds millions of people, but it's not super sustainable for long-term use. This also jumps back to the Green Revolution, which I bet all of you are thinking, oh, the Green Revolution? That's all about helping the environment stuff. No. That was the start of the industrial system. It was started by a man, and they call him the man who fed 1 billion people. It was the use in the beginning of using pesticides, herbicides, monocropping at such a large, high scale. And there's a lot of places that really picks it up real quick. And South America is one of those. And so the Green Revolution wasn't, we need to make this perfect so it's long-term use. It's, we have a lot of people to feed. We have a big population that's growing day by day quicker than we can imagine. We need the food to do it. So that's the Green Revolution. And now we're stuck in this kind of loop. We hit our peak oil, which actually we hit a long time ago in the US. Maybe, Mom, you remember it when gas prices went up for the first time, but then they dropped back down because we found oil back in Glacier Bay. And over the course of 3 years, I'm pretty sure the price of gas in the 70s around there, 69 to 70s, mid-70s so, the prices of gas went up by 5 times. So if it was whatever it was before, if you times it by 5, that's exactly how much it went up. But of course it went back down until recently. And how much are we paying for gas now a gallon? $4. We're sure hitting a lot of peak. So one of the things that we decided to do as a class was build our house design, which mine's not as fancy. As you can see, it's pretty simple, pretty laid back, but it was taking everything we learned from the year, every last little lesson, every last little reading we did, that we all thought was pretty useless at the time, but we put it into our design. So first one is you build your base map, which is basically your house and the property around it with anything you have, maybe trees, like I have here and here. And so that's about that one. Then you build everything that could happen. So it's everything that's going on. So The purple lines you see are a lot of shade that the yard gets during the day. And this is, I built it on the most common shade. So, I mean, like about 2 o'clock in the afternoon roughly, this spot gets some heavy shade because the sun's heading at an angle, but most of the time during the day it will get sun. So that's what the purple stands for. The green with the little stick people and the lines represents where most of the activity is. So this corner of the yard right here, which is the biggest piece, gets most of the activity. And you can see it from the back that there's no grass living there because of all the dogs and humans that go over it. Also the chickens that run around the yard, they pretty much kicked it clean. They do a little bit of activity back here. There's this little cubby of like where we grow flowers and so that they like to hide in. They just eat bugs and roll around in dirt like dogs. And then you get a little bit of activity here, but not much. And back here, I only broke down because we were in winter when we were doing it. And this is where you get a lot of activity during the winter, but if it's not the winter, then you hardly get anything back there at all. Because there's just a little side spot, your wood pile, which you don't need to burn a fireplace in the middle of summer. Next, I split it up so I kind of organized this one by which is the most effective to use and which ones are the least effective. So our most effective is this little corner here on the side of my house. And why I listed this one as the most effective, because there's absolutely no activity back there whatsoever. Nothing touches it, nothing disturbs it. So I decided that would one be one of the perfect spots. 2, it's a good spot. It has a little ground piece for like little ground crops. Like we had strawberries there, but we recently got rid of them. So you can grow carrots, lettuce, anything kind of really along those lines. But also going up the sides of the house is a trellis, and we can grow whatever we really want on it. In the past, it's just been growing and trying to occupy space, so we use hops and things like that. So that was one of those. Also, we recently had our honey hive collapse, our beehive collapse, from back here in this very far back corner. So we decided, well, we can move it now, because one thing with bees is you can't move them unless you can't move their hive at all, because then they'll get confused and then they'll all just start dying out because they don't know where to go. So since they all died, we're like, well, now we can move it. So we did move it over here, just by chance, right out from under this tree. So now we have bees right next to the gardens, the plants that I'm going to be planting. So it's straight pollination. They'll be going there every single day. Nothing to disturb them, nothing to get in their flight path. Away from the wasp nest that is currently located right over here. So they're like out of the way, it's perfect. Next, I decided, this was the next good area, because you have your there's the compost right across from here, located here. I'm going to show you right here. It's located right here. So that's the compost, that's the beehive, that's the little area to grow. And so you have the compost, which we use on the regular. I mean, it's used every single day. If you buy the chickens, our chickens will get in and eat everything in there. So that's very nice. And then right next to is actually another beehive that we actually saved from that got attacked by a bear. So we have yet another hive that's running and working already. So then that's the last one. This one I couldn't really put in but there's a chicken coop right here under this tree, and it's actually an apple tree. So that's just another thing that I added to the design, really. And right here is the main area I grow, because once again the dogs and the chickens are running around and they destroy everything. I mean, my chickens will eat anything. I've eaten the fried chicken out of my hand before. I kid you not, it's disgusting. I was walking and it just jumped up and took it out of my hand and started eating it. I was sick to my stomach. So another thing is we decided, since permaculture is about using nature to your advantage, you need to build your design around nature. So you need to have things that nature do. So of course one of the main things my system has, of course, is photosynthesis. And photosynthesis is the process that plants use to convert chemical energy such as ATP and NADPH into glucose, which is what they feed on and eat. So it's basically them turning energy into food. And so that's what really keeps them going, and it's a very long, complicated process with photosystem 1 and photosystem 2, which are wrongly named in personal opinion, because they're used in different ways and they should be switched around. So of course, photosynthesis is a very vital thing for all plants to have, is what my system really works off of, because I decided that I've tracked down every last spot that gets sun, which is actually mostly the backyard. And I said, all right, those are the places I need to plant. I found the sunniest spots so they can get what they need. The places with the most access to water. So those are actually located right here and here. And one of my main growing spots is right here, so that's like right next to my water source. The only reason water goes out there is because the gutter system is pretty good. And the land's flat, so it doesn't have anywhere to go, so it just soaks into the ground. So then next is the nitrogen cycle. So I decided to build my system using the nitrogen cycle to its advantage, because the nitrogen cycle is when nitrogen in the ground gets transferred into the atmosphere at time, and then they'll do full loop-de-loop back into the ground. But also, plants will suck it up into their roots because they need it to help survive and build and become stronger. And then animals, such as this little deer right here, will eat it, and then eventually it will either poop it out or it will die and it will decay and put that back into the ground. And it's just a big process of that going through. And so how I decided this was going to be incorporated into my design is, one, we have a hound dog who eats everything. And grasses and Tori are mutt. They eat grasses by the ton, and they keep pooping it out. So one, they bring a lot of nitrification in, but two, our chickens, which I'll get up here, 7 chickens poop quite a lot. So they help keep that nitrogen cycle processing and keep going through and everything. But also they help with pest control. I have not seen a single bug in our backyard for the longest time with these chickens. So yeah, that's just the nitrogen cycle and how my system really uses it by incorporating it into the animals that we have. And native species are basically keystone. So I can tell by the cheap little picture, your keystone species is the most vital, important part of the system, of an ecosystem. So what I decided was probably one of the most vital pieces of my system was my bees. I love my bees, one, yes, but two, they help pollinate, and a plant can't really grow that well without pollinating, and it needs bees and stuff to pollinate. So if I keep my bees running around, they can pollinate my plants. I get honey from them, I get honeycomb from them. They bring like a nice environment with them too, and it helps keep wasps and things out of the yards because they're very aggressive. But of course, you also have your invasive species. And your invasive species are things that they're not native to your area. They come in and they can take over pretty quickly, and they just kind of like playground bullies of the whole system. So I decided that I should, when I'm growing and planting and stuff, I should try and avoid species that are non-native, because I don't know what kind of after effects they'll have after planting them. Because I don't know, things like spearmint and peppermint stuff, they grow like wildfire and they're very aggressive. Are they native? Maybe some species and stuff. I mean, it varies wherever you are that you'll have different species. But they're very aggressive and they will take over everything and anything they can. So kind of just like watch what I'm putting in and use a more native species, because native species, if you look at, I mean, we can't really see it from here, but I mean, some of these invasive species have some deep roots because they're things like weeds. And the weeds, of course, have deep roots so they can survive. But the native species, they all have deep roots, even the smallest of them, just because it's adapted to your soil and it knows how to build itself off of what it can work with. So I've been looking for something more like a native species because it's used to Colorado, because we can have some harsh weather here at times. I mean, look outside. It hit us hard with snow, and something that's invasive, that's not strong enough to really work with Colorado weather, will definitely die. Alright, so another thing, competition. It's kind of hard to see, and you will be surprised how easy it was to find this. The search lightsaber battle, this is the first thing I showed, I swear. So, competition is one of the most important things I also decided, because, I mean, you have 3 different kinds of competitions. You have exploitive, interference, and apparent. And your exploitive is really when 2 species, so let's say, I don't know, 2 plants are growing next to each other, they're exact same plants, and they'll just keep, they'll just sap the resources until basically one comes out on top because it was just a little bit stronger, a little deeper roots and things like that. But your interference is when you have things such as bindweed versus your tomato plants. And bindweed, for those of you who don't know, is just a small little thin plant that likes to wrap around your plants and choke them to death until they can't get anything and they die. So that's when interference is when they actually butt heads. That's when you see animals trying to attack and kill each other. That's in nature the most brutal form. It's a real form of actual competition of killing to get your resources. And apparent is another basic one, which is when 2 species, one smaller than the other, so let's say A is bigger than B, and they're both preyed on by predators, bless you. as species B gets bigger, A will get smaller because predator C will produce more offspring to eat them, and so A will get substantially smaller while B gets bigger because it has less to compete with. So that's a parent competition where it's just the predator that's really decided to comes out on top. And I decided that's going to be important because I don't want to be planting plants next to each other that will attack each other and kill each other, or also I don't want to put my bees next to a wasp hive. Obvious, the wasps are bigger, they're stronger, they can sting more, they'll definitely steal their honey and abuse the bees, and I don't want that. I decided that competition is really something that's important if I want to grow because I don't want things attacking me and killing each other and losing plants just because I planted something in the wrong spot. Okay, so cellular respiration. This one is another one of those I decided was really important because, once again, it's used every day on my plan, which is by humans and the animals. Because cellular respiration is the exact opposite of photosynthesis. Cellular respiration is when humans or animals take glucose and they completely break it down and transform it back into ATP or NADPH, chemical energy. So, like, I don't know, if you all ate breakfast this morning, right now your body's going through cellular respiration 1,000 times over. I mean, it's breaking down every last little cornflake you ate right now to get that energy out. So I decided that's important because my chickens will be using it from the food that we get from our garden, the dogs will be using it, everything that goes into my system that's a living animal will definitely be using this process, and it's very important to kind of keep this process moving. So like our chickens, they're very good at this process. Quite a lot. Alright, so we read, as many of you know already, Animal Vegetable Miracle by Barbara Kingsolver. And I'm going to state it now, it was my favorite book now. But it was definitely a very important book. It was very good, it helped teach a lot, helped point out a lot of things. And if you don't know, this is Barbara right here. This is her husband and her 2 daughters. And actually her husband and her daughter, the older one, they wrote little sections inside her book. So like, they get some published recipes, others published like a little like side story, things like that. So it was really interesting to see like this test to see if they could really live off of like what they grew for a whole year, which they did it pretty well, but they did of course have those things like that. Her husband needed coffee. Of course you can't grow coffee where they were, so they had to buy it. And there's things like that that you'll never really be able to get past, but they were still pretty local, and they hosted a part, in one part of the book they hosted this giant party, and it was all like locally grown really. Like not a single thing was really shipped from out of this country or even the state to get to them. So it was pretty impressive that they were able to pull such a thing like this off, to go a whole year without, having to buy from a store. But also the only reason they were pulled off is because they're kind of rich. Someone like my family really couldn't pull it off. No, we couldn't really support our whole family because we have a big family. People are coming out all the time. We don't know really, it would never work. We just don't have the time, the space, or the money to really get something like that going. But she has this very small family, the money to do it. She kind of really knew what she was doing, things like that. So it was interesting to see a test subject like this, but it's also a very unrealistic thing for a lot of people to do. It's more something that a few select people can really get done and live their lives like that. But they also still have to buy from the stores, so that presents another problem. And finally, the food you can eat can either be the safest and most powerful medicine or the slowest poison, by Dr. Ann Whitmore, who was an old, of course, a doctor, but she also helped, she backs the more healthy, organic style of food. And she was really old. She was back 1900s about, I think she was born 1985, so, and then on. So she was old by the time Jesus was young. All right, she was very old. So yeah, that's mostly it. Thanks very much.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah.
What's your design goal?
My design goal is pretty simple. I mean, most people